Imagine being Valentino Rossi. 9 world championships. Decades of racing at the highest level. You have stood on podiums in Japan, Spain, Australia, and Italy. You have heard 90,000 people chant your name at Mugello, the cathedral of motorsport, where the hillsides turn yellow from the sheer number of fans wearing your colors. You have seen everything this sport, this life, this world can throw at you. And then one afternoon in Rome, at a tennis tournament of all places, something stops you dead in your tracks. Not a crash. Not a controversy. Not a record broken or a rival defeated. A group of fans. That is the story we are telling today, and I promise you, by the end of it, you will understand why a motorcycle racing legend left a tennis stadium with tears in his eyes talking about a 20-year-old girl from Manila. It was a warm afternoon in Rome in May 2026. The Foro Italico, one of the most beautiful sporting venues on the planet, was buzzing with the kind of energy that makes the hairs on the back of your neck stand up. The Italian Open was underway. The clay courts were orange and pristine. The marble statues that line the venue stood watch like they always have, silent and ancient, witnessing yet another chapter of history unfolding beneath them. But something was different that day. Something you could feel the moment you walked through the gates. Because everywhere you looked, in every corner of that stadium, draped over railings and shoulders and waved above heads, were Philippine flags. Red, white, and blue. Stars and sun. Hundreds of them. Maybe more. The sound that filled that stadium was not polite tennis applause. It was something rawer and louder and more emotional than that. Laban Alex. Laban Alex. Over and over again. A chant that had turned a Roman amphitheater into something that felt more like a hometown stadium 11,000 kilometers away from Manila. Valentino Rossi had been invited to the tournament as a guest of honor. He came expecting a nice afternoon. A bit of tennis, some good company, maybe a decent meal afterward. He was not expecting this. He walked into the Foro Italico and stopped. Just stopped. He looked around at the flags, at the painted faces, at the families who had clearly traveled from all over Europe to be in that stadium on that specific afternoon. He listened to the chant. And the man who had seen absolutely everything in sports stood there looking genuinely stunned. Now, to understand why that moment hit him so hard, you have to understand who Valentino Rossi is. Not just the statistics, though the statistics are absurd. 115 Grand Prix victories. 9 world championships across multiple classes. A career spanning more than 2 decades at the absolute pinnacle of motorsport. You have to understand the culture around him. In Italy, Rossi is not just a sports star. He is something closer to a national deity. When he races at Mugello, the Italian MotoGP, the atmosphere is unlike almost anything else in sport. Tens of thousands of fans camp on the hillsides for days before the race. They dress in yellow, his color, his signature shade. They build elaborate stands and banners and effigies. The noise when he passes is physical. You feel it in your chest. That is the world Valentino Rossi comes from. That is his frame of reference for what passion looks like. So when he walked into the Foro Italico and saw something that rivaled that, something spontaneous and organic and completely unplanned, driven entirely by love for one young woman from the Philippines, it shook him. Because he recognized it immediately. He knew exactly what he was looking at. A tournament official was accompanying Rossi that day and had to explain the situation. "Who is this player?" Rossi asked. "This is Alex Eala," the official said, smiling, because he had already given this same explanation to Francesco Totti a day earlier and Andrea Bocelli the day before that. The Eala effect, as people had started calling it, was something that kept surprising people who should have known better by then. Alex Eala. 20 years old. Born in Manila. Trained in Barcelona at the Rafa Nadal Academy. The kind of talent that comes along once in a generation, but also, and this is the part people outside of tennis might not fully appreciate, the kind of person that comes along even less often than that. Because it is one thing to be gifted. It is another thing entirely to carry the hopes of an entire nation on your shoulders while thousands of your country people chant your name in a foreign city and somehow use that weight not as a burden but as fuel. Rossi sat courtside and watched her play. And what he saw in her movement, in her competitive fire, in the way she fed off the crowd rather than being overwhelmed by it, pulled something out of him that he had not expected to feel that afternoon. A kind of recognition. After the match, journalists wanted to know his reaction. They expected him to comment on her technique or her athleticism or her potential rankings. Rossi, being Rossi, went somewhere else entirely. When I was young, he said, I was not the most naturally gifted rider on the grid. There were others who were faster on raw talent alone. But I had the fans. He paused for a moment, collecting his thoughts, because this was not the kind of thing he talked about lightly. He meant every word he was about to say. When you know that 90,000 people are behind you, not watching you, behind you, everything changes. You cannot give up. You cannot surrender. Because if you do, you are not just letting yourself down. You are letting all of them down. And then he looked back toward the court where Eala was still signing autographs, working her way slowly along the barrier, making eye contact with every single fan, and he said something quietly that the journalists in that room will not forget. She reminds me of myself at 20. Not because of her tennis. Because of her heart. There are athletes who perform for crowds and there are athletes who perform with crowds, and Rossi, who spent his entire career doing the latter, could spot the difference immediately. Eala was not playing in front of her supporters. She was playing for them, with them, drawing something from them that elevated her game in the moments when the pressure was highest. That is a rare quality. Genuinely rare. And Rossi, who had built an entire dynasty on exactly that quality, understood its value better than almost anyone alive. But the moment that truly caught the world's attention came after the match was over. Before Rossi left the stadium, he did something that nobody had asked him to do and nobody had suggested. He made his way not to the VIP lounge, not to the media area, but to the section of the stands where the Philippine flags were densest. The general admission area. The section where the overseas Filipino workers and the migrant families and the students who had scraped together enough money for a ticket had gathered. He walked toward them. At first, people did not recognize him. Rossi without his helmet and his racing suit is just a tall Italian man in a dark jacket. But then someone realized who it was and the recognition spread through that section like a wave, and the noise that erupted had a completely different quality to it. Warm and surprised and deeply moved all at once. He stood in front of them. He looked at the flags they were holding. And then he pointed at the flags. He pointed at his own heart. And loudly enough for the cameras to catch it, he said two words. Tifosi incredibili. Incredible fans. The response was immediate and thunderous and emotional. People were crying. The chants shifted from Laban Alex to something that sounded like his name mixed in with everything else. And Rossi, the man who had spent his whole career being celebrated, stood there in that moment celebrating them right back. Because that is the thing about people who truly understand what the bond between an athlete and their supporters means. They never take it for granted. They never forget that the relationship goes both ways. When asked about it afterward, Rossi was understated in the way that great people often are when they have done something genuinely meaningful. They traveled so far, he said simply. They gave so much. They deserved to be acknowledged. I was just the one who happened to be there. Just the one who happened to be there. From the 9-time world champion. From the man who has received more standing ovations than almost any athlete in the history of motorsport. There is a humility in that sentence that tells you everything about why people love Valentino Rossi the way they do. And then came the part of this story that I think matters most. Before he left the Foro Italico for good, Rossi asked for something unusual. He asked to meet Alex Eala face to face. Not for a photo opportunity. Not for a press moment. He genuinely wanted to speak with her. The meeting was arranged in a quiet area near the players' lounge, away from the cameras, away from the noise. Rossi was already there when Eala was brought in. He stood as she entered. That small gesture, standing to greet a 20-year-old tennis player, says everything about the kind of man he is. Eala had grown up watching Rossi battle Lorenzo and Marquez and Stoner. She knew exactly who she was standing in front of. And the conversation they had, though it lasted only around 10 minutes, carried the weight of something much longer. Rossi spoke to her not as a celebrity to another celebrity, not as a motorsport legend condescending to explain life to a young tennis player. He spoke to her like someone who had walked a version of the same road she was just beginning and wanted to pass on the one thing that experience had taught him above all else. The crowd you have, he told her, do not take it for granted. He had seen it happen. Young athletes with extraordinary gifts who slowly built a wall between themselves and the people who believed in them, who became unreachable, who forgot that the connection with their supporters was not a distraction from their purpose but the very heart of it. Do not let that happen, he said. And then he told her something that cuts right to the core of what sport at its best actually is. Your people are your power. When you feel like you have nothing left, when your legs are gone and your mind is exhausted and you genuinely do not know how you are going to get through the next game, the next set, the next point, look up. Remember them. They are not just watching what you do. They are living through you. That is not a small thing. That is everything. Protect it. There was a pause. And then Rossi stood to leave. But at the door he stopped and turned back. One more thing, he said. In racing we have a saying. The race is long, and in the end, it is only with yourself. He let that sit for a moment. But today I learned something new. The race is long, but you are never alone. Alex Eala has a career ahead of her that nobody can fully predict. She is 20 years old with the kind of game and the kind of mind and the kind of support behind her that makes her trajectory genuinely exciting to follow. But I think regardless of what happens in the years to come, regardless of the titles she wins or the matches she loses or the journey that still lies ahead of her, that afternoon in Rome will be one of the defining chapters of her story. Because it is not just about tennis. It is about what it means to carry a nation's hope and to do it with grace. It is about thousands of people who traveled across a continent on crowded buses and cheap flights, who took days off work they could not afford to lose, who painted their faces and stitched their flags and showed up in that stadium to remind one young woman that she was not alone. It is about a motorcycle racing legend who thought he had seen everything and walked into a tennis stadium and had his mind completely changed. Sport at its very best does this. It reaches across languages and borders and disciplines and reminds us that the things that move us are more universal than we think. The courage it takes to compete under pressure. The love that flows between an athlete and the people who believe in them. The way a single human being can, if they are the right kind of person in the right kind of moment, make an entire group of people feel seen and proud and alive in a way that nothing else quite can. Valentino Rossi has felt that in every direction. He has been the one in the racing leathers feeling 90,000 people lifting him. And now he had stood in a tennis stadium and felt the other side of it. Had felt what it is like to witness that bond from the outside and recognize it for what it truly is. The doctor, as his fans call him, has a diagnosis for Alex Eala. She has the heart of a champion. When you have that, he said, the trophies will come. He left the Foro Italico that evening a little quieter than he arrived. A little more thoughtful. Because even after everything Valentino Rossi has seen in sport, a 20-year-old from Manila and the thousands of people who crossed a continent to cheer her name managed to show him something new. And if that does not tell you everything you need to know about Alex Eala, I genuinely do not know what will.